And that that was a big part of where the Good Horsemanship channel came from. Is it's like, if you think that this is good horsemanship and you're putting this out to the world, and as an institution, you're going to tell people that this is your winner, I don't want to be a part of that. But there was a lot of ego, I think, in the way that young horses are started around the world. So the Good Horsemanship channel came about really as a way to try and spread, exactly as it says on the tin, good horsemanship. So if you move their shoulders over, if you move their hind feet over, if you can move them backwards, if you can move them sideways, if you can walk, trot and canter, then your horse will be good. It's not that. It's not that, because there's horses that can do all of that but hate doing it because the way it's been given to them has been negative.
Hello and welcome to the Curious Equestrian podcast with me, Anna Louise, and today we meet Joe Midgley, a British horseman and founder of the Good Horsemanship channel on YouTube. He specialises in starting young horses and is renowned for his unique approach to horsemanship, emphasising the mental connection over physical movement with horses. Travelling the UK and beyond, Joe looks to spread the message of good horsemanship to all that will listen. In 2019, Joe founded the Good Horsemanship channel, a streaming service allowing you to watch the unique style of horsemanship from anywhere in the world. From babies to bridle horses, new footage is always being worked on his website, goodhorsemanshipchannel.com, and you can see more about Joe and his events at joemidgleyhorsemanship.co.uk. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be
Oh,
here.
thank you. Now take us back. What inspired you to launch a YouTube channel?
Well, originally, and it ties in very closely to the young horses. I did a colt starting competition in Poland,
Oh,
and when we
wow.
got there, it was an experience, and it became very it became very apparent that there was a lot of, what's the word, ego, I think, in the way that young horses are started around the world. And obviously, I'd seen that in the UK, I'd seen it in the US, but it, a lot of what I was seeing was people trying to copy things that happened in the US and not necessarily the good bits. Um, so the Good Horsemanship channel came about really as a way to try and spread, exactly as it says on the tin, good horsemanship, away from a lot of the labels that are often stigmatized. Natural horsemanship is a term that people love or hate. Um, so I kind of dropped that word because I do think the words are important and people's connotations are important. Um, so yeah, it that's kind of where it all started. And I was in Poland and I remember thinking, I wish that I could do something to get to people when we go home. And that's kind of where it started. It started as a YouTube channel. Um, Now it's its own website, and there's hundreds of hours of stuff on there now. We're currently filming. I'm down at the moment. Well, I'm at home at the moment, but I'm going to and from Sovereign Quarter Horses in Cambridgeshire,
Oh,
and I'm starting
wow.
all the Weanlings down. The Weanlings are they've just been weaned. They're between 6, 7, 8 months old, um, and they've had a great life. They've had a great start in life. They were born, checked that they were all okay, and then they live on acres and acres and acres of pasture with their mums. And then one day, they bring the mums down, they wean them, and then a few days later, I come and start them in their training. So tomorrow will be day 5.
Wow.
Um, and it's just incredible, when you see how fast these babies pick up on the little subtleties. But then it's incredible also how easily it is to create the bad, even down to ridden problems years and years in the future. You, I'm doing so much to try and prevent those problems now. Uh, and it's just, I just love it. I think it's incredible. And
Well,
I
I
think
was going
that's
to
another part
ask
of it, is
you.
being passionate about it.
Yes, 100%. And I was going to ask you, what are you dealing with when you're turning up to work with a weanling? Because that's something that most, us equestrians don't get to meet a weanling. Normally, by the time we get our horses, they are,
Yeah.
either mature or they're further down the line. But what are weanlings like to work with?
There's a bit of a variety. You have a variety based usually on how the mum is. So, for instance, there's one at the moment who, when I would walk in the stable, she would try and jump out of the stable. And the stables are, I don't know, 8 foot tall, and she would do her best to jump out. But
Wow.
her mum was a very controlling mum. She didn't allow the foal to play with the other foals. She didn't allow her to go off and make friends. So then she's been weaned, and they're weaned in a nice way. But she's had a life that's been very, very micromanaged. Whereas the other foals, whose mums were a little bit more lenient, would go off and make friends with each other, and they'd have a few hours away from them, and they started to build that independence. So they're a lot happier. Um, but quite often it's not the way you expect. You see the really sensitive ones, and they come to you within seconds, and then you see the ones that are all kind of cocky out in the field, but they really don't want anything to do with you when you get started. But yeah,
Isn't it
it's
like being at the school
it
gates and having, human children are so shaped by their parents, aren't they, as tiny children? And
yeah,
yet,
absolutely.
because we take foals away from their mums, we don't really think about how they're parented. We more think about how they've been trained.
Yeah,
So that's really interesting that those few
absolutely.
months have such a huge impact.
Absolutely. And I mean, these particular foals are all related. They're all brothers and sisters. They share a dad, and some of them are even closer related with, mums that are related some way, but obviously separately. Um, so they're very, very closely bred, and yet they're still completely different. And I think that's
Mm.
really astounding. Is you can breed the best with the best, and then hope for the best because it's no guarantee. You
That
know,
is a very good
you
saying.
don't know what your mare is going to be like as a parent, and those early stages of their training is crucial as well.
How much work do you have to do to kind of rewrite a very strong parent or a very controlling mare over a mare that's kind of let her foal do its own thing and be more free spirited?
It's not so much redoing the work; it's just with a foal that's essentially feral. You're starting at the very very beginning. When I'm working with a yearling or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, and off we go. You kind of have to start where that particular horse needs you to start. But even the brave foals still don't want you going near them. So step one is step one, and that
Yeah.
might just be getting them to look at you, and you start doing the work on getting them to look at you, and within 2 minutes, that horse is walking up to you. That horse is still trying to kill you, you know. And it's not often you get them that want to be aggressive, but it does happen sometimes. Which again, sometimes that can be following the mum's example. You just never know what you're going to find, but it is fantastic. I love doing it. I just like to follow the progress of them.
Mm.
Like I did the foals at Sovereign last year, and I've seen some of them when they've gone to their first shows as yearlings and things like that, and it's just so nice to see how they're progressing. Knowing that I was the first one that ever touched them,
Oh.
which is
And I
pretty
was going
cool.
to ask you, what is your ambition with the foals? Because we know when they get to the ages for breaking, we know what you're trying to do in order to work with them positively. But at such a young age, what do you want to see
Hmm.
them doing, Joe, and responding?
So the first thing is the engagement. You get a lot of people who manage to, they maybe hold out the head collar and sort of manage to scoop their nose in the head collar. Like you're already off to a really bad start then, because you're establishing the idea that your horse is leaving, even when that you can't even lead them yet, but they already want to be away from you. So the first stage has got nothing to do with head collars. It's about drawing the eye and getting them to where they're willing to look at you. And then the big thing is that when you are trying to catch them, you've got to where you can rub them everywhere and stuff. But then when you're catching them, if you're here, they're looking to the head collar. So they bring themselves to it rather than, and you see this a lot with older horses and bridling, which is a mistake that people often make during the starts, is that people are trying to bridle them and they're chasing the horse over there to try and bridle them. And people don't realize the impact that has mentally, because the horse has already checked out at that point. And then you're having to force the bit in the mouth, or you're having to force the lead rope around the nose or what have you. And it's very, very difficult for a horse to ever willingly give to the pressure you might apply if getting that equipment on them has been coerced in the first place. You can never give to a halter if the horse didn't accept the halter going on. You can never give to a bridle if you had to battle to get the bridle on. I believe that anyway.
Yeah, no,
So that's kind of the first
100%.
stage. And then following that, the first thing is teaching a step that I call the reach. So the reach is, if these are the horse's shoulders, getting the horse to step wide with the inside leg rather than to come across with the outside leg. And that's the biggest problem that people create with babies. Because you physically can pull them a bit, people do, and that's how they teach them to lead. But you load up the weight on the inside leg. So if I'm over here pulling, what ends up happening is my horse doesn't want to move. The foal doesn't want to move. That's a given. So you pull and you load all the weight onto this leg, and then that one kind of falls across, and you get your first step. But what you're establishing there is that inside bend drops the horse onto the forehand, and that stays with them forever. So what I would do, and I've filmed a series with one of these babies, so that will go on the Good Horsemanship channel sometime next week. And I create a coil, and the coil is kind of like I don't know what the word is. It kind of draws the horse's attention. So you create the coil, you move away, and then you drop the coil, and the lead rope will wiggle a little bit, but it's only very, very gentle. And the horse kind of goes, "What's that about?" But they do that on a loose rope. It's their idea to look. That's followed up then, they start to step into it. And instead of loading up the weight onto that shoulder and inside bend creating lean, you actually create then the inside bend means lift into it, which is a lifetime of habits, and it's years worth of work that you then don't have to do because your horse is posed with a new situation and they think, okay, lift myself, rather than, oh, there's pressure on my head, drop onto it. And I can't tell you how many hours and hours and hours that saves people, just having that.
And Joe, take us back to your horsemanship journey. Where did you fall in love with horses, and when did you think, I actually want to dedicate my life to horsemanship?
Well, originally, I come from a family of show jumpers, and it was never a passion of mine whatsoever. So I'd sat on horses and what have you, but I would have never classed myself as a rider particularly. And then we had a family friend who opened a Western riding school in York and asked us to go and just ride the horses. I think it was before it had officially opened, and so we went. And at the time, I was a obsessive tennis player, and of all things. Anyway,
Oh no, I wasn't sure what was
I was an
going to come out
obsessive
your
tennis player.
mouth then. It wasn't that. I didn't
Yeah.
expect a tennis player.
No, I was an obsessed tennis player. I think I was about 14 at this point, and that was where I wanted my career to go. If I wasn't going to be a professional tennis player, I was going to be a tennis coach. And then I had an accident, completely non-tennis or horse related, and dislocated my shoulder. And that was the tennis career goodbye. So the beauty of the Western riding was that they were riding one-handed. So I've got pictures of
Okay.
me riding in those early days with my arm still in a sling, but riding around with
No.
one hand. And I think ultimately the Western this was Western riding at this point kind of filled the void that was left by the tennis. And then as time went on, um, it was very Western. It was a little bit more old school, should we say, to how I do things now. Um, I mean, I'm grateful for what I learned with those people, um, but yeah, a little different to what I do now. Um, and then when I think I was maybe 16, when I got my own horse, um, and I'd seen, people like Chris Cox, Clinton Anderson, Monty Roberts, the big name trainers that had come over to the UK. I'd seen them, and I was fascinated by it, and I'd watch everything I could on YouTube and what have you, and then when I was about 19, I think, Chris Cox did a UK tour. He did a UK and Ireland tour, and he went to Hull, which is kind of my end of the country. So I went and watched the demonstration, and he, I got to speak to him at the end, and I asked if he did any kind of like apprenticeship or working student program or anything like that. And he told me he was doing this TV show where he would take 10 young trainers, work with them for so many days, and they would film the whole thing, and the winner would win an apprenticeship with him. So I
Mm.
applied for that, got in, went, and stayed in Fort Worth. It was quite a terrifying thing. Um, I mean, I'd been abroad a little bit on my own before, not with the horseman. Well, that's another story. um, I'd been abroad riding before, but not with the horsemanship. Um, but it was still scary because the time I'd been before, I'd been to South Africa, and I'd gone with a big team of people and what have you, and I think I was 16 then. But I still felt like a kid, and I still felt like a kid at 19. But it was just me. I just got on a plane and went and stayed in Fort Worth and had to find my way from Fort Worth to Mineral Wells, which is quite a drive. And obviously I couldn't drive. So yeah, anyway, that was an experience in itself. Um, and then I made it to the ranch, and they filmed, I think, 100 hours worth of footage over, I think, 10 days that they were filming. I stayed a little bit longer than that, and they had to condense it into 5 hours for the TV show. Anyway, long story short, I won the place, but I couldn't tell anybody because it was going on RFD TV,
Oh, wow.
which is kind of like the US Horse and Country. Um, it's like an agricultural equine TV station. Um, anyway, I won the apprenticeship, but I couldn't get the visa, because I wasn't a
Oh,
US
no.
adult at the time. It made it really, really complicated. Obviously, you're considered an adult at 18 over here, but in the US it's 21. So it was a
Mm.
really complicated thing, and I didn't have the money to fight it, and it went on anyway. I didn't end up going, but the time I'd spent there, we started recently actually. Larry Mahan, who was a champion bull rider and rodeo rider, passed away. But when I was there, he had like a collection of wild mustangs that lived on his land, and they just kind of herded them into these stock trailers and brought them to Chris's ranch, and we just had to like pick one and start them under Chris's guidance, which that was an experience and a half as well.
Oh my gosh.
But
Wow.
that was kind of like the feralness of these weanlings, but with
Yes.
5-year-olds, so these
Wow.
big powerful horses that didn't want you anywhere near them. So that was pretty hardcore.
Joe,
Um,
which horse
and I
did you
think once
pick? What did you look for in that cohort of Mustangs? What were you looking for?
at that time, at that
Yeah,
time, I was
yeah.
looking for
At that
one that was
particular
pretty
time.
quiet because I didn't want to die
Yeah.
in a foreign country. Um, I think that was my main concern was I knew how expensive American medical bills were.
Yeah, good point.
So um, yeah. Anyway, the I looked for one that was quiet, which now, and I guess it depends on what you're doing as well. I was looking at starting that horse. That was it. If you're looking for one that you're going to then take into something, do you want it to carry a grandma around or do you want to go and compete it? You're going to look for different things. So there was tough horses there, there was shy horses there was brave horses there. There was a bit of a mixture. I think that they brought something like 15 altogether. And I picked a little black colt who I named Smokey, um,
Oh.
which was massively original. Um, and yeah, I started him, and it went really well, uh, and yeah, it was great. But I think if you can start a wild Mustang, you can you can start a horse as a rule because it forces you to make sure you've covered every step. It's something you see with older horses a lot is you get like a pretty quiet gypsy cob or an Irish cob or often a cob, who's pretty laid back, pretty easygoing, and people don't do the work because the horse just kind of lets you do stuff. I've known so many people with horses like that who one day they just kind of got on them and rode them off down the road. And it was never a problem until one day the horse does a
Mm.
backflip because you find the one thing that puts the horse out of his comfort zone and you never actually prepared for being out of their comfort zone. Whereas, the opposite end of that spectrum is people buy an ex racehorse straight off the track and they spend 6 months doing groundwork with them because they know they're going to die if they get on that horse's back. So, anyway, the Wild Mustang was kind of like that. It's if you get on this horse now, you're going to die. So you've got to do this. But in order to do this, you've got to do this. In order to do this, you've got to do this. And honestly, minus the saddling and the riding and what have you, it's not altogether different to what I'm doing now with the Weanlings.
Mm.
It's being able to draw the eye and get the horse to seek comfort from you because a lot of people don't. They chase them away with the stick or what have you, and they chase them in a way that tries to make it look pretty, but ultimately it's still chasing. And these horses get incredibly uncomfortable, but there's a huge difference between a horse that's behaving because they know it's the quietest way to be, as in you'll stop bumping on them and pulling on them and waving your flag around if they behave in a particular way, versus a horse actually seeking comfort from you. And the problem there that people come up against is when your horse finds something that's scarier than the idea of you waving your flag, they won't care about you waving your flag. And if it's you, a dry stone wall, a horse, and a combine harvester, the thing that's going to break first is going to be you. So it's just not worth it. It's in my opinion. But it's a little tougher, obviously, dedicating your whole time with your horse to kind of developing your own feel. And feel is
Mm.
a funny word. Um, it's a word that a lot of people have never heard in the horse world that have been in it for years.
Mm.
But feel is kind of everything.
Yeah, can you
Uh,
elaborate on that, Joe, and on your philosophy that prioritizes the horse's willingness to try and follow the feel over their physical movements?
Yeah, so well, I'll go back to Poland actually. So when I was in Poland, the first day, I didn't catch my horse, and I had the judges sending me like private messages and things, telling me I needed to drive that horse harder and all of that. I needed to put more pressure on the horse because it wasn't a show. And that's the thing is they didn't make the
Mm.
money from selling the horses; they made the money from selling tickets. So it had to be a show anyway. This guy's come from the UK and he's not even caught his horse on the first day. That's a problem. So I get all these messages and everything. Anyway, I catch him the second day, but I didn't sort of sacrifice any of my principles. The other guys had caught their horses the first day, within minutes, but they were dripping with sweat, and you knew full well out of that scenario it wasn't going to work out. Anyway, fast forward 3 days, and you get to the obstacle course. Anyway, I'd said I wasn't going to ride my horse because, in the States, they'll use 2-year-olds. They'll use 2-year-old quarter horses that are, bred for colt starting competitions sometimes. But they're kind of short and stout and stocky and strong. We were in Poland, so they were using Polish warmbloods. A 2-year-old Polish warmblood is not carrying a rider. Not not ethically, you know?
No.
Anyway, I said as much, and it didn't go down well. But anyway, by the third day, this obstacle course comes along, and your horse gets herded into a big pen, not the little round pen that you've had up to that point. And I just kind of walked up to this 2-year-old stallion, caught him, and in I went. The other guys, the horses are dripping by the time they've got them because they've had to run them around this pen. And it's like, how do you guys not see that this isn't horsemanship? This is not horsemanship. Horsemanship is, well, it's putting the horse first. The horse is the first part of the word horsemanship. So you've got to put the horse first. And I remember it plain as day. All of this had happened, and I'd had all these, like encouragements, shall we say, to work the horse harder and do this and do that and do the other. And I walked into this pen, and this little stud just sort of looked at me and went, "We've got this." And then I went first because I was coming last at this point because of the the not riding him and everything. So he just
Gosh.
came over and he did every single obstacle, and it was a beach theme that year. So there was like a lifeguard on a like a high chair, and she blew a whistle every time he went near her. There was a bar set up that had a carrot under it for the horse and a drink of water for you, but it had all dangly things that the horse had to walk under. There was a trailer that you had to load them into. There was a paddling pool they had to walk through. All these, and there was a bridge. The bridge is a big deal. So I've got this fantastic picture of my horse stood on this bridge triumphantly with all of the plants that were decorating the bridge just in his mouth, and he's just holding this bush and like waving his head around, and I'm just laughing my head off. Anyway, I have another picture of the horse that won the competition and the rider that won the competition of the horse on that same bridge throwing itself on the floor, and that that was a big part of where the Good Horsemanship channel came from. Is it's like, if you think that this is good horsemanship and you're putting this out to the world, and as an institution you're going to tell people that this is your winner, I don't want to be a part of that. So I was happy. In the end, I came second because the guy that came third, he caught the horse in the end, but it just reared around the arena for like half an hour, and then in the end he just put it away. But the best thing about that show is a lady called Kay, who is a trick trainer over here, had done that same competition a couple of years before, and she told me it's a very funny scoring system. she said, once you've completed all the obstacles, you can go around them again and you'll get more points. So I completed all the obstacles, but I'd done them on the ground, which meant you only got half the points. Anyway, I was like, I could win this on a technicality. So I took him back to the trailer, because technically every time you loaded the horse, you'd get like 5 points or something. So I just took him in and then took him out and then took him in and then took him out. Anyway, then this announcement comes on over the speaker saying you can no longer accumulate points from repeating obstacles. And I was like, I'd been warned about this because it was a way that people had won in the past. And what it came down to was they could have never let a horse that didn't get ridden win over a horse that had been ridden.
What?
Even though that horse threw itself on the ground at one point and was obviously unhappy. At the end of it, that horse had been ridden just in a halter, just in a rope halter. And all of the pictures at the end of that event, somebody is covering the side of the horse's face where the halter had cut into his face. And, there's colt starting competitions all over the world, and that's where the ego comes in. That those trainers, horsemen, whatever you want to call them, didn't go there to help those horses. They went there to present themselves, and people miss that. People look at the end result and see that the horse got ridden around and think that that's in some way positive, but they don't think about how the horse feels about the whole thing. So, that was a massive influence for me.
To show off and also a chance for them to dominate as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it did resonate with some people. I think some people did recognize what was happening because, my horse didn't falter on anything. He covered every obstacle. And then he did the freestyle, and in the freestyle, which is the bit you can do whatever you want, I think I backed him up off a finger, used my little finger to back him up. I roped all around him and through the rope and that type of thing. And he just kind of did everything, but it wasn't what they were looking for. What they were looking for was that show of dominance, and I'm not saying it couldn't have been done. Had I had a 4-year-old that was the same horse, but 4 years old, a little bit stronger, I would have been able to saddle him. I just didn't feel it was right to saddle him. So.
And how did you
let
those moments shape you, Joe, moving forwards? How did you make sure those moments didn't knock you? I know you must have been very strong-minded anyway to stick to your principles and think, no, this is wrong, and although this is a competition, I'm going to do it my way and not worry about anyone else. But how did you also let that shape your future as you moved ahead with your own training principles?
I'd had a teacher when I was a kid he was a real inspiration. I still speak to him sometimes now. I mean, he's retired, and I left school like 10 years ago at least. But I still speak to him now because he was a massive role model to me growing up. And a lot of teachers, when they found out I was going to be a horse trainer, were like, "Whoa, don't do that. Go to university, get a job you don't like, and then use that to pay for having horses as a leisure hobby." Anyway, and he was the opposite. He was like, remember one conversation we had, and he said, "You know what? Somebody somewhere will be interested in the same thing as you. So your best bet is don't, get another job if you have to start with, but get yourself as good as you can at the thing that you want to be good at. And eventually you'll get recognized enough that people will be willing to pay you for it. And once they're willing to pay you for it, you can spend like all your time on it. And then you'll get better even quicker." And I remembered that in Poland, and I think the biggest thing was, I don't think this is right, there will be people around the world somewhere that don't think it's right. And I'd rather stick to what I believe in and wait until I find those people than change
Mm.
it to appease the people that I'm with now. And that's worked out pretty well,
Yeah.
you know. It's, I feel like most of the people that I teach now, most of the people that would attend my clinics and demonstrations and stuff are of that mindset. And yeah, I'm kind of where I want to be in my horsemanship now. My clinics and everything are attended by people that I like, and I think are there for the right reason. They're not there to try and show off. Um, and in a lot of cases, it doesn't really feel like I have clients as such. I just have a very large group of friends who want to come and ride with me, which is kind of an honor in itself. Um, that people would give up their time to do that.
Mm. I was just going
Could.
to say, Joe, you practice the traditions of two traditions that I actually can't even pronounce and have never heard of in my entire journey with horses. So please tell us about these traditions and how they influence your training methods and why you use them.
The Buckaroo and the Vaquero, I'm guessing.
There you go.
So the
Yeah.
Yeah, the Vaquero style of horsemanship was heavily influenced, kind of with the creation of the American quarter horse, but also the founding of America. So horses were originally brought to America by the Spanish and the English, but at different ends of the country. Well, actually, originally the Spanish moved to Mexico, and they brought the farming methods with them. Which, when you look at how cattle were farmed in Spain, traditionally, it's not all too different to how the Western horses are today. But what happened was the Mexicans moved up and started calling themselves Americans. Well, that might have come quite a lot later, but what they found was that the climate started to get cooler as they moved into what is now North America. So they were able to spend more time training the horses. So it became more of an art form than it was a working tool, although they still used it as a working tool. And that's where like the bridle horse came from, but also the vaquero style. Vaquero is the Spanish translation for cowboy, and
Ah.
the the art of the bridle horse is about creating a horse that is completely light, is willingly guided entirely from the body, and then you can apply them to anything. That's the beauty of it. But they're considered a working horse. They're considered a horse that will have a purpose. So, bridle horses wouldn't necessarily. There's not really a class that you can put them in, because you can't simulate a lot of the things. They've got to be able to open gates. They've got to be able to rope, drag things. They've got its functional skills while also being refined, light, soft, and athletic. They had to be able to work a cow. They had to be able to rope and drag a cow. They had to be able to carry a grandma around. It was a big thing. The traditions of the vaquero was that they didn't wear a bit until they were at least 7 or 8 years old. And that would be the age that the horse's mouth had finished developing, because they never wear a snaffle. They never wear a snaffle bit. They would only ever wear the bridle bit, of which there are various variations. So they were started in the hackamore. The belief of that was to protect the mouth. They would. It was a common belief, and it's true. The mouth doesn't develop, and it's constantly changing. So the idea of putting a bit in it was kind of thought poorly thought of. You wouldn't do that until the horse's mouth was finished developing, and that was
Mm.
the vaquero tradition. Anyway, when the war came, First World War, the vaquero, a lot of the horses were taken to be used in the war. And when they came back, obviously the military had used snaffle bits. So these horses came back having already learned how to push on a snaffle and do all bad things basically in a snaffle.
Mm.
So you'd put a hackamore on them and they'd just be uncontrollable. So that's kind of where the buckaroo tradition came from. In the buckaroo horses start in the snaffle, then move to the hackamore, and then move into the bridle, or the two rein and then the bridle. The idea of that um, was basically they were fixing the problems that had been created with those horses during the war before they would then go and start the bridle horse process in the um, in the bridle and the hackamore. But funnily enough, you said at the beginning about not being able to pronounce one of those words, and that's actually where the word buckaroo came from.
Oh,
Is
really?
because people typically couldn't pronounce vaquero, so it became buckaroo, vaquero, buckaroo. It's the same.
Ah.
It's the same thing. So for a long time, and to this day, some people kind of consider them the same. But to me, that's the distinction. Is the buckaroo came
Mm.
later. Uh, they use the snaffle bit. Um, the vaqueros start in the hackamore. And as I say, there's
Mm.
differences of opinion on that. But for me, I would categorize myself more as a buckaroo. I typically start them in the snaffle. I do a lot of work in my clinics where I take a skull with me and we look at the
Mm.
anatomy of the mouth and how the bit works and fits and all the rest of it. So the idea to me that a horse's mouth isn't developed is fine because I might change the bit every year, every 6 months, every year, to accommodate for how the teeth have changed or how the tongue has changed or how the palate has changed or whatever. Um, so that to me isn't a problem. But obviously that knowledge wasn't as good as it is now back then. We've got
Mm.
professional bit fitters now, whereas way back when a snaffle was either a straight bar or a single joint. That was it. Um,
Yeah.
there wasn't all these transangle things that we have now. So
And
yeah,
Joe, what are
that's
some
kind of
of the
it for me.
most I was just going to say, what are some of the most common challenges you do see when you're starting young horses, and when people come to you with a problem young horse?
I would say the lack of preparation, or at least the preparation having been undervalued. People have this thing about leaving young horses until they're 5, and then one day they're gonna start. Then they want to ride them the next week, and
Yeah.
it's like, hang on a minute, like you can't catch them, you can't lead them very well. They're kind of dragging you everywhere. They run
Mm.
over the top of you every chance they get. You try and pick their feet up, and they're really mad about that. The horse is just offended at pretty much everything that you're doing because there's no connection. You've not established a connection, and the funny thing is, there's an old Ray Hunt saying, if you spend more time, it takes less time. And that's
Yeah.
true. You
Yeah,
can
it's
be.
true.
I've had horses come in for training who, what I achieved with them in 6 weeks, say, versus what I achieved with my own horse in 6 weeks is on a whole different level. And that's because I'm trying to do the preparation that I did with my own horse over a year with a horse in a week, you know? And people could, there's no reason why you can't take your yearling to a clinic, or you can't take your
Mm.
yearling or your 2 year old to a clinic and start building those foundations because, Remy, who actually is the horse in the magazine here,
Mm.
the Western Horse UK, um, Remy, what he was doing in 10 rides, honestly, I mean, I can send you a video of it if you'd like. What he was doing in 10 rides, some horses don't ever do,
Wow.
and that's he was just willing, but he was willing because he'd been encouraged to be willing. you achieve more in an incredibly short period of time, just on the basis that horse has had preparation going back a long way. The Remy, I first got him when he was a yearling, and he learned that reaching step as a yearling. He learned to soften his head. I talk a lot in the clinics about there's two main muscles. One of them is the sterniomandibular, which runs down here. This is Buddy. And the other one is the paratido-auricularis, which runs down here along the back of the mandible, along the back of the jaw. And that's kind of jaw tightness. So you see a lot of horses that are ridden on really firm contacts that end up with these like bulging lumps back here. But a big part of teaching horses to be light is about getting that sterniomandibular to relax and the jaw to relax to the pressure that you apply. That's a big part of building a bridle horse and that foundation of true lightness. So he learned that as a yearling. He continued it as a 2-year-old. And then when I started him, because again, I looked in his mouth and some people call it the torus, some people call it the lingus, which is like the fat bit of the tongue that pulls food to the back to swallow it. Remy's starts abnormally far forward. He was incredibly mouthy when he first wore the bit. So I started him in the Hackamore. I started him how the vaqueros would do it. And because he already understood how to relax that muscle and the jaw in response to a halter, it didn't take him too long to figure that out in response to the Hackamore. And consequently, he was just soft straight away. There's no substitute for that. And then he did the Western Roundup, which was held at Oak Ridge at the end of September. So he'd had about 6 months training at this point. So 6 months riding at this point. So he was a little bit more established than he was obviously at the end of his start. Still early days. Anyway, I volunteered him for the cattle work demo because I thought it would be a good thing to show people how introducing horses to cow work should go if they have a solid foundation. Tom Wilkinson, who runs all the shows and stuff at Sudbrook, he brought the cattle over and he commentated and told me where to go and where to move the cow. And Remy, nobody would have known that it was his first time. When we were moving the cows around the arena, and there was a moment where he just realized, I'm in charge here. And after that, he just flew around. He boxed the cow, he rated the cow, he did everything he was supposed to do. It was just phenomenal to watch the passion kind of ignite in him. Was just phenomenal. And you can't get that if your horse is switched off to you. If you don't have that connection, you just can't. There was a point where somebody else was doing their demo and they wanted all the horses out the arena, but the other gate was blocked off. So we just had to get into the pen with the cattle. And the pen with the cattle, not that much bigger than this room. And there was 4 horses and about 7 cows in this pen. And my knees were pressed against the rider's knees next to me.
Oh my
And
gosh.
Remy just stood there and just watched the demo. And that was 4 years old with 6 months riding. And you can't buy that. But yeah.
How much do you think, Joe, was that Remy actually feeding off of you versus what you taught him in training? Or was it a combination of both, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I would like to think that I ride in a way that is confident. So I'd like to think that he would take that direction nicely anyway. But more importantly, every time in his foundation that he'd ever been posed with something that he wasn't sure about, you still always set it up to be positive. You never want to get a young horse and set them up for a canter transition. And then if they do it too quickly, you yank on the rein and say that was too fast. Because then they've looked for something, they've tried to seek the result or the outcome or the whatever, and then they've you've met something bad. And that's one of the quickest ways to kill your horse's try. And he'd never experienced that. He'd only ever experienced, well done, good try. That wasn't quite right, but maybe if you did it like this. So it didn't take him long to think, I'm going to run after this cow, see if that's what you want. And obviously I did. And he's doing another demonstration at the Horsemanship Showcase. He's doing both days at the end of November. And a big part of that ride, a big part of my riding demo is going to be on riding without reins. And the point of that is to show the significance of your body, because a lot of the time we dull the horse to our bodies. We aspire to this very shoulders back, straight, angle, position. And the communication is happening through the reins and through the legs, and not many other places. And that's sad, I think, because your body is by far the most effective tool that the horse can feel. So you'd want to surely use that to both yours and your horse's advantage.
For our listeners who are equestrians themselves, what advice would you give them for starting their own young horses with that in mind?
I would say that the biggest thing is do everything you can to develop that try. There's no movement. If you move their shoulders over, if you move their hind feet over, if you can move them backwards, if you can move them sideways, if you can walk, trot, and canter, then your horse will be good. It's not that. It's not that, because there's horses that can do all of that, but hate doing it because the way it's been given to them has been negative.